Get your notebook. There's more.
Welcome to episode 8 of CN Live. I'm Elizabeth Voss.
And I'm Joe Loria, editor-in-chief of Consortium News. It is now more than a month since Kashmir has been on lockdown after India revoked Article 370 of its constitution that gave the province special autonomy. As India attempts to annex the disputed territory, hundreds of Kashmiri males have been arrested, telephone and internet communications have been cut, and curfews are in place. Human Rights Watch reports Kashmir has been at the heart of a territorial dispute between India and Pakistan since the two nations gained their independence in 1947. Both claimed Kashmir. In 1948, the then ruler of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh, who was holding out for independence, accepted becoming part of India on condition that the state retain autonomy in all matters except defense, currency, and foreign affairs. UN resolutions calling for a plebiscite to determine the final status of the territory have been rejected by India, which claims that because Kashmiris have voted in national elections in India, there's no need for a plebiscite. Pakistan maintains that a plebiscite should be held. Several of the militant groups in Kashmir have also called for a plebiscite, but argue that an independent Kashmir should be an option. And now India has revoked that autonomy and claimed Kashmir to be part of India. Joining us later in the program today will be Maleeha Lodhi, Pakistan's ambassador to the United Nations. We're very pleased now to be joined from New York at the mission of Pakistan to the United Nations by Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi. Ambassador Lodhi has been at the UN for several years now. I remember when I was covering the UN that I had several interesting conversations with her. She's a former journalist, so she understands what we're doing here. And we do appreciate you coming on to speak to us about this, a very difficult issue of Kashmir. The U.S. media has done, I think, a pretty poor job covering Kashmir from the very beginning, certainly in the last years. It's not a priority. Certainly they give much more ink to the Palestinian-Israeli issue than they give to Kashmir. So a lot of Americans, who are the majority of our audience, although we're seen around the world, don't have any idea what the Kashmir issue is about. Could you give us a very succinct, if that's possible, in 2 minutes, a history of the Kashmir issue leading up to what has happened in the last few weeks?
I've never had to sum up such a complicated issue in a soundbite, but let me try. The issue of Jammu and Kashmir is the issue of the unfinished agenda of decolonization, because what it involves is a disputed area inhabited by over 14 million Kashmiris. And these people, at the time of independence of both Pakistan and India, people of Kashmir were promised by Indian leaders and by UN Security Council resolutions that were adopted in 1948 and subsequently, that they would have the right to guide and determine their political future and their destiny by a plebiscite which had to be freely held. Now, a former Prime Minister of India, Mr. Nehru, had promised them this as well. But these promises were broken. The story of Kashmir is the story of a monumental tragedy of broken promises, human rights violations, military occupation, and what we see today, a curfew that has lasted for over 32 days, with all of Jammu and Kashmir being turned into an armed cage, where people are not even allowed to come out of their homes.
So what is the immediate impact now on the region, and what is the latest that we could learn about?
I think there are two things to keep in mind. One, we have never seen so much international focus, including by the Western media and Western human rights organizations, on the plight of the Kashmiri people, because everyone knows what's happening there. The footage, the news, the reports that are coming out of there show a story of torture, arbitrary arrests, the freedom of Kashmiris being completely taken away from them. So this is the state of play right now. And this state of play obviously is untenable, because India's action, which it took on the 5th of August, to formally annex the Kashmir, whereas, as I said to you before, it is disputed territory, it is an international territory.
So what India did, of course, was to revoke Article 370 from its constitution, which had given autonomy to Kashmir and is now annexing it, as you say. Some people compare what's happening in Kashmir to what I mentioned earlier, to the Palestinian issue. That in Israel, there have been more and more movements towards annexing at least the settlements, if not all of the West Bank at some point. Is that a fair comparison between the two?
I think it is correct to depict it that way because the Indian action of 5th of August seems to be right out of the Israeli playbook and the way the Israelis have treated the people of Palestine. Both issues are about an occupied people and occupied territory. Both issues are among the oldest issues on the UN Security Council agenda. Both issues concern the lack of implementation of UN Security Council resolution. And both issues are about the plight of a people who have been dispossessed, who have seen their liberty taken away from them in every possible way. So I think when we talk about the people of occupied Kashmir, we must remember this is about a people who are in deep distress, who have been held prisoners in their own land, who cannot pray, whose children cannot go to school. One teenager died of what are used as guns to put down peaceful demonstrations, which are pellet guns. One teenager lost his life today to pellet gun injuries. So what you're looking at is a situation of deep distress. And I think the fact that human rights organizations like Amnesty, like Human Rights Watch, like the Committee for the Protection of Journalists are all speaking out, they're calling out India's outrageous behavior and its cruelty to the people of occupied Kashmir.
What can you briefly, again, you did a great job giving a 2-minute history of can you briefly talk about the UN's role in this? It's been very fraught. It has been in and out, and tell us what the UN's role has been and what it should be, you think, in your view.
It should be 11 UN Security Council resolutions on Kashmir, and they entail an obligation on the part of the UN to help hold a plebiscite in Kashmir so that the people there can decide on how they want to be governed and how they want to live. These resolutions have not been implemented. And I think that is an obligation that the United Nations still has. As well, the Secretary General of the United Nations today talks about prevention being at the heart of what he wants to do around the world. Well, he needs to act to prevent a bigger crisis in South Asia, because what is happening in occupied Jammu and Kashmir is certainly a flashpoint. There are already tensions which are at a peak between India and Pakistan, and the situation can snowball into a much bigger crisis. So I think the UN certainly has long-standing obligations, and it also has immediate obligations, including an end to human rights violations that are going on. I mean, human rights is at the center of what the UN does. So if the UN doesn't speak out, which some UN officials have spoken out, the UN Secretary General has issued a statement expressing his concern and also saying that the matter must be resolved according to the UN Charter and according to the UN Security Council resolutions. But we need action. We don't just need words, we need action.
Well, what about the mediation by the Secretary? Now, India has traditionally not wanted the UN to mediate this. Is that correct? But have you told the Secretary General what you've just told us? Now, this situation, as you say, is even more fraught with danger than the Palestinian-Israeli situation, because only Israel has nuclear weapons, where in this case, both nations have nuclear weapons.
You know, Prime Minister Imran Khan, my Prime Minister, has repeatedly said that West would let the situation spin into a bigger crisis. And you're absolutely right, this is a very fraught situation. Now, the UN Secretary General has always said he's ready for mediation, and we'd like him to offer mediation, but he's also qualified that by saying both countries have to accept mediation, Pakistan and India. And India's refusal to accept mediation. So where are we right now? India refuses to talk to Pakistan. India refuses to accept mediation, whether it is mediation offered by President Trump or it's offered by the UN Secretary General. And India refuses to abide by its human rights commitments that it upholds in various UN bodies. And of course, India, above all, refuses resolutions which remain on the books of the UN Security Council. So this is a litany of yes, no, 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 no to everything, except to repression, oppression, violations and acting with impunity, which is what its occupation forces do in Kashmir.
My last question, what has the U.S. position been historically? And they've had very good relations with Pakistan, especially during the Cold War, and they've had better relations with India recently. What has been the U.S. position over time since this began at the time of partition and the end of British rule until today, the Trump administration's position?
The US continues to accept, acknowledge, and recognize that this is an international dispute and that it must be resolved peacefully, which is exactly what Pakistan says. We would like to resolve this dispute peacefully, but it has to be in accordance with the wishes of the Kashmiri people and in accordance with the UN Security Council resolutions.
So you're pleased with the U.S. position?
Well, we think the US should step up and do more. We think the US should call out on the human rights violations that are going on. I think the US should also call out and say something about its role in helping to implement Security Council resolutions. If the United States, which has been a standard bearer for human rights.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Ambassador, can you share any insight on why India made this move now, earlier in August? Is there any particular reason that you see that has led to this development?
I think that's a question that only the Indians can answer. I cannot answer. All I can say is that my country has seen and described this action as illegal, as an illegal and illegitimate annexation of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and a violation of Security Council resolutions, because Security Council resolutions clearly say that there can be no material change that can be brought about in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And this is clearly an attempt to bring about a material change.
That leads me to my next question, which is that Pakistan's ministry said in a statement that as party to this international dispute, Pakistan will exercise all possible options to counter the illegal steps made by India. And that's a quote from their statement. And I wanted to ask you what those steps might entail, if you care to comment on what options Pakistan has in response to this move by India.
I think the intent of that statement was to say that we will stand by the people of Jammu and Kashmir, that they're not alone, that we will continue to be their protector, and that we will continue to speak out for them and do whatever we can, and that all diplomatic and political options will be exercised by Pakistan, which is exactly what we're doing. We took up this issue. We asked the Security Council to convene and to discuss this issue. That happened. We are going to be speaking at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So you can see that we are going to be using every diplomatic forum. My Prime Minister will be coming here for UNGA's High-Level Week, which is the General Assembly's High-Level Week. He will be speaking on this issue. He will be meeting with other world leaders. So we are going to continue to build political and diplomatic momentum to bear on India, and India then listens to the voice of the international community.
You and Joe mentioned earlier the issue of the fact that both Pakistan and India are nuclear armed states. To what extent, what is the degree of danger of an increased risk of nuclear conflict in the wake of this development?
I can tell you, Pakistan does not wish to see any kind of conflict. And Pakistan is a responsible nuclear weapon state. That is why we are urging the international community that it must step in before there is a bigger crisis. We do not wish to see a bigger crisis. There is a crisis that is going on now in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It is a crisis that is affecting the daily lives of men, women, and children. And before that gets out of hand, it's important that the international community acts to prevent any bigger crisis.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was my last question.
Well, we'll let you go, Ambassador. We know you have another appointment, and it really was great of you to join us for these 20 minutes. And we hope that this crisis is resolved peacefully. So thank you again for joining us. That was Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi coming to us from the Pakistani mission to the United Nations in New York City. And you're watching CN Live.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.